everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the upcoming Batman The Long Halloween, The Last Halloween #9, and the artist and co-storyteller, or just storyteller, on Batman and Robin Year One. It's Chris Samnee. Thanks for coming on, Chris.
Thank you for having me again.
So we are recording this in the evening for you on Tuesday, August 20th. School is back. You're in Gotham. How was the day in Gotham? Was it even a Gotham day, or was it just crazy school day?
We got the kids off to school, and then I was in notes mode. I inked most of a page, and then I've been emailing a whole bunch with my editor, our colorist, Mat Lopes. I got a new version of the script for #1 from Mark that I've been looking over. So a lot of emails, a lot of like not sitting at the table and drawing, but a lot of like it's all still work. It's all just rolling down the hill, but it's a lot less pencil mileage today than yesterday.
What is notes mode?
I try and set like a day where I try and get as much of like the paperwork and like the not fun using a pencil and paper sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Like Matt needed notes on colors because we're finally getting down to exactly what we want the book to look like. He's done like 5 different versions of half a dozen different pages, and we are bouncing things back and forth and trying to hammer down exactly what the book's going to look like, not just the first issue, but like the series. So it's been that and reading the script, because the way Mark and I work is that we co-plot it over the phone, and then a whole bunch of emails back and forth and texts, and we try and figure out exactly what the story is going to be. And once we have it all figured out, he will type that up into like a single page document. And then I take, whatever's on that sheet and turn that into 22 pages of layouts. And then most of the time they just have blank balloons in them to figure out like what space I need for dialogue, but I don't put it in there. So then Mark takes those layouts and then adds dialogue to that. So the script isn't like panel 1 like description. The description is already a drawing. It's just like literal, just text of what they're saying from panel to panel. So I've been going back through my inks next to the script, like laying down on the floor of my office, like one thing next to the other, and trying to see if they match up or not. But notes mode is just like not like drawing mode. It's just like I have to use the other side of my brain, because I don't really have like a analytical brain. I'm a doodle bug, and it's really hard to try and like focus on, not art. But once I finally get in that zone, then I try and just keep rolling until I burn myself out. ADHD gang. Woo.
I have so much I want to say about all that, because it's all very fascinating. I like Doodlebug. Doodlebug is great. I feel like that's probably not a technical term, but it feels like it's very descriptive in an accurate way. But is there like a name for that process? That isn't Marvel style. That's not full script. It's like the Samnee Waid special.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of evolved from when we did Daredevil, we were storytellers. It was full script, and I would just draw from the script. And that's very much, I think that was more of like a DC style. And the more comfortable we got with each other, the more open the script started to get. And it got to the point where it was like, and then for 3 pages, they fight, go nuts. And I enjoyed that freedom, and it made it easier for Mark to do more than one book at a time. And the more freedom he gave me, I feel like the better my work was, and that we worked better together. The more interaction we had, the more back and forth we had. And the official name of what we were doing went from, writer to writer for Mark, and then penciler inker for me, to at some point I think it went from penciler inker to just artists, and then it went from that to storytellers, because at some point we were just getting on the phone and we kind of like hash out what we were going to do, and then he'd write the script, very much still like a professional, like beat for beat kind of script, but then I would be free to do whatever I wanted to make it work for both of us. Like we can both have as much fun as possible. And that's when we were storytellers. I think it was still full script when I was working on Daredevil and Rocketeer Cargo of Doom, because I signed on to do both of those at the same time. So I was drawing both of those books concurrently. And then once I was done with Rocketeer, then it was just Daredevil. And then as our working relationship progressed, then we got more comfortable and it evolved into storytellers. And then
Black Widow probably changed a little bit too.
very much so. Black Widow is pretty much how we're doing Batman and Robin, minus me doing the first pass at dialogue. So just like what we're doing now, we get on the phone, we talk it out, and he would do the breakdown, and then I would dialogue everything on the layouts, and then send it to him, and he would go make whatever gobbledygook I put on the page make sense.
Right.
I was just sort of spewing it out, and he sort of reined it in and made sense of whatever I was just splattering all over. It was each issue we tried to make a certain feel, a certain genre, other than just a superhero book. Some of them was like a spy thriller, and the first issue was, you know, a James Bond pre-credits. You know, some of them were superhero. We had Iron Man. It was fun working that way because it was, you know, it felt like, you know, I was actually crafting a story more than just being a wrist. And I really feel like I did my best work on Black Widow. And once we were done with that, I still had like 6 issues on my contract for Marvel. And we were just trying to figure out what was going to be next. And Captain America is what fit. I think Mark already knew what he wanted to do with that. And that one, we went right back to, you know, early days of Daredevil sort of full script. And we did that for, I think it was 6 issues. Somebody's going to have to look that one up. I don't know for sure. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a bit. But do you feel like as you've kind of taken on each project, whether it's with Mark or not, like after that you had Firepower and you had Jonna and the Impossible Monsters. And those are obviously massively different books. Like Jonna was like a family affair versus Firepower, which was you coming in with Robert Kirkman and working on a book at Skybound. And so obviously they're going to be, I imagine, diametrically opposite experiences in some ways. But do you feel like every project you take on, you learn a little bit more about what way works best for you and how you prefer to work?
Yes. I'm always open to trying something different. And every one I feel like I've learned something on, and what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. I feel like I'm really good at telling a story in pictures, which I mean works out well because that is the job. I'm not so great at dialogue, and I'll own that. You know, it is what it is. I'm by nature pretty quiet, so putting dialogue into other characters' mouths becomes harder for me because I don't talk a whole lot in real life. So it's harder, like as a not very chatty person, to make other characters chatty. Like I can't live through them. I have a much easier time putting myself in Jonna's shoes, where she just kind of grunts her way through life and punches things like that. I can get. I can, you know, I can put myself in that place very easily. But like the world's greatest detective, not so much. I know what he sounds like in my head, but if I were to try and type it out, it's not gonna work. I was making notes on stuff for Mark, and I was like, this doesn't, you know, this or this doesn't sound like a year one Batman, or this, you know, Bruce Wayne should sound like this. Like in my head, I know what they sound like, but trying to type it out word for word, it just makes me sweat. I'm sweating right now thinking about it. It's not my skill set.
I mean, it's like, you know, when it's not there, but it's hard for you to pin down exactly what it should be. So I did want to talk about Firepower and Jonna just a little bit, because you mentioned the Rocketeer book earlier. Was that 5 or 6 issues? I don't remember how many issues that was. Maybe it might have been
2015 or 20. No,
it was a while ago. It was a while ago. And so
it was I don't know. I don't know how many issues it was. I haven't looked at that stuff in years.
You did that at the same time as you were doing Daredevil when you first got on that book. And that was probably a lot. But I mean, Jonna was 12 issues, and that was you doing a lot more than you normally do. And it was your baby with Laura, of course. And then Laura Samnee, your wife and co-writer. And then Firepower was, God, what was it? 30 issues and a prelude OGN. And so you were doing all of that at the same time. How did you do that? How?
Well, I'm fairly quick, and honestly, Laura takes care of so much stuff around the house. Like getting the kids back to school, getting their clothes, the clothes bought, the groceries together. Like, she does almost everything that isn't drawing a comic book. Like, she keeps this house running so that I can spend time working. And I don't spend 23 hours a day working like I did when I was a teenager, but I still have to put in time at the table, to get all this stuff done. And she helps facilitate that. And we were just talking earlier today about, we're gonna have to readjust the schedule to make X, Y, or Z try and fit. We have 3 kids in a full schedule as is, and then with everybody going back to school, like, there's more time for me to squeeze in a certain, in certain blocks while the kids are at school. But then, once they're back home, there's a lot of, moving parts.
Right.
So for me to be able to do more than one book at a time, back then it was easy because we didn't have kids. We'd moved out to Portland, and I could just sit down and draw. Like, some days I'd go to Periscope and hang out with Jeff Parker and Steve Lieber and, and just like be part of what felt like a community. Or I could just sit at my desk and work until I passed out. It was just, there wasn't, all the things that come with being a grown up like we have to do nowadays.
You mean back when you were doing Rocketeer, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was 23 years old, and it was just Laura and I, and it wasn't, it was a whole lot easier to just, have a 12-hour day without interruption.
Mm-hmm.
So nowadays, like, trying to do more than a page is a chore. But back then I could do a page before lunch and then a page from lunch to bed. It's not as easy nowadays. I say as I'm trying to juggle 2 books again right now, but what are you going to do? It's only for a little bit.
Right. Well, and I think the thing that people don't realize is that, like, with Firepower, it was effectively the equivalent of 36 issues over 3.5 years, but that doesn't mean you were working on it for 3.5 years. That was just like the release schedule. So you had some lead up going into it. I don't know how much lead up, but you had some. And then Jana, not that it was fortunate this happened, but it got pushed back because of the pandemic and everything. So it ended up getting, I think, launching in like March or May 2021 when it was supposed to launch, I think, in 2020 originally.
Well, we were not expecting the pandemic when we started working on it. And it took us longer to make than we'd planned as well, because all of a sudden everybody was home. The kids weren't at school. We were all trying to figure out how, everybody was going to be doing virtual school and how we were going to make everything work with everybody here all the time. Pre-pandemic, I rented office space, and I would go out and, we'll work at the office for 8 hours and come back home and, then be dad, not, the work grunt. And I was starting to figure out a way to separate work and home, and then the pandemic hit, and it was like, well, I'm not going to the box anymore we call it the box, because it's just like a little room for me to work in, and it didn't have anything in it. It was just like a desk, a chair, and a lamp, and like, go there, and it was work mode. It's a little nicer now, but I get still in the habit of calling it the box.
I like it.
It just feels like solitary. Put them in the box. But yeah, the pandemic hit, and then I stopped going out to work. I started working just from the basement, and that slowed me down. And also, just like, it was stressful. I mean, we all went through it. It was a lot. And then to try and do it with 5 people in one house, and it was, and also try and draw 2 books.
Yeah,
it was tough. Not just draw it, but try and write it when, you got the kids running around the house. Like, Laura and I were trying to sit at the table, like trying to figure out a line of dialogue, and the kids are screaming and running through the house. And like, it helped with certain parts of the book, but the craziness of the feel of it, but it wasn't the best working environment where you really need to focus.
Yeah.
Which is we really need to do when we're trying to juggle 2 different things.
Well, and there's probably like the project management element to it too, where you have to make sure the balls are rolling and, getting stuff off to Matt Wilson for colors. And it was Crank that lettered it, right?
Crank did Jana, and we had Russ for Firepower.
But you wouldn't have to project manage Firepower, but you would Jonna to some degree. And so I know you worked with an editor, but there would be some element to that. And so there's all these different things going. But another thing you had to deal with, a patron asked about. A patron named Jeremy Thomas Burke asked, I loved RC Coda. I swear to God, this is not me saying this. I loved RC Coda in the back of Firepower each month, though I know Chris was not a huge fan. I'm just curious, did he ever learn anything during those conversations with Robert Kirkman that affected how he approached his Firepower pages moving forward, or any of his subsequent work? I learned a lot about the choices both writer and artist sometimes need to make working on monthly comics. RC Coda forever. RC Coda, for listeners that don't know, is a section in the back of each issue of Firepower. There was basically a conversation on the phone between Robert Kirkman and Chris. And I read all of them because I love things like that. It was very clear that you did not enjoy it as much, but did you learn anything from that?
No.
That's fair. That's fair.
When I took on the book, I knew it was going to be a lot of work. We had already pitched Jonna. And I knew I was going to be trying to juggle two things. And we'd already talked about me not, liking, I'm not a chatty person. I like you. We get along. We have a nice conversation once a year. But I'm not like doing interviews, like the pad interviews that you have to do for like press when a book comes out. It just makes my skin crawl. And I was like, I'll do Firepower with you if I don't have to do any press.
Right.
And he was like, well, yeah, no, like it doesn't work that way. Like if we're going to do a book, like I'm happy to cheerlead. And, he was saying like, it's fine if you don't want to, but we really do need to do something to get the word out and for, to talk about the book. And what we landed on was doing RC Coda, where we would talk once a month on the phone and record it. And then that would be what they would use to sort of have us talking about the book, as opposed to me going out and like doing press or answering the same 6 questions and for all the different websites to try and get word of mouth about the book. And it seemed like a good deal until we started doing it, because we didn't have to do it for the prelude, because it was supposed to be hush hush, and I worked on it for like the better part of a year getting all of that done, so that once it was done, there would be the surprise announcement of number 1. And then, hey, psych, it wasn't just a prelude. Like, we've already got a monthly. And hey, guess what? We've already got some, in the can. And it just keeps rolling. So we didn't do one for the prelude. And that's like 6 issues worth of a book. So I was just cruising. And like, we didn't have to do an RC Coda for that. And I was like, well, maybe he forgot about it. And then we started, the first issue was supposed to be for Free Comic Book Day. I don't know if we did one for that or not.
I don't think you did.
And then we started doing them monthly, and I was like, oh man, this is way more work than if I had just done a few interviews at the beginning. And we would always have to schedule it late at night. Once I was already tired, we'd do our calls at like 10 o'clock at night, my time. And I was just, like, it's already been a whole day. And we were juggling a whole bunch of stuff, and I'd get the kids to bed, and I was already burnt out. And then it would be like, all right, it's time to go rah comics. And it's obvious that I was burnt out whenever we would have a call. Laura thinks they're hilarious just because it's so much like the grumpy coffee shop employee that I was when she met me.
Sure.
Like, I used to just like, I don't know. I didn't like what I was doing when it wasn't making comics. So like everybody else had to suffer. So if I was, whether I was a cable guy or if I was shelving books or I was slinging coffee in the coffee shop, I don't know. I thought it was funny, or at least entertaining to me, to like give people a hard time. And they'd come in and they'd say, I want a venti frappuccino. And I'd say, I'm sorry, no. They'd be confused for a second. I'd say, we're not Starbucks. We're just a coffee shop in Borders. It's a large, and we don't have frappuccinos. We have, and I do, say what we have. And I was honestly kind of a dick, and that was enough to entertain me. But that's what Laura says the RC Coda reminds her of. It's just like me just being like done with it. So like, I think I don't know what kind of vibe I give off in that. I haven't read any of them. I know that I was tired for most of them. I think a lot of times there's back and forth that we just thought was funny, and we keep it in because it's like whatever. I mean, I hope it doesn't come across as like we weren't friends. I worry that a lot of it seems combative, but I don't know. I don't know how it reads. I only know how it felt like when we were talking. We were just like goofing around for an hour and a half, and then would be like, "All right, well, I'll talk to you next month." I'll look for the script. And it was, it was fun to just like have a chance to just shoot the shit and catch up, and also talk, kind of process, because I don't really do that a whole lot. Most of what I do is like in my head. I get the script and I figure it out, and then the rest of the month is just paper. And I scan it and send it, and then we just keep the train rolling and just move on to the next one. So it was kind of nice to be able to talk, about how we made it, or look back on what I had done, even if my memory is terrible. So by the time we were talking about an issue, it was like 4 months of from when I was working on it, and he'd be like, "What were you thinking on this?" I don't know. I don't know what my choices were a lot of the times, because I've moved on. I had to make 8,000 choices since the last time. So if we were to do it again, I think if we had to do another RC Coda, if we had to talk about what I did, I would hope that it would be closer to when I did it instead of when it's going to print. So much of it it's just like it's lost to the ether.
There's two things I want to say. I really did actually like it, and clearly Jeremy did too. But the other thing is like, it did make it seem like you had incredible recall about every time you drew Peanut Butter the dog, because every time you talked about Peanut Butter, you seemed very happy about it.
I did like Peanut Butter. I like that dog. My parents had Jack Russell Terrier when I was a kid, so I had I had that logged away for whenever I needed the reference.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. The most notorious name in terror is back with a vengeance. Find out why the return of the infamous and influential EC Comics is the once-in-a-lifetime comics event that reviewers are calling triumphant, horrifying, exciting, twisted, and more. From the publisher that first drove Tales from the Crypt, Weird Science, and Mad Magazine into the heart of an unsuspecting world, EC is back with 2 all-new unrelenting series from Oni. First, every tombstone tells a tale in Epitaphs from the Abyss, the no-holds-barred horror series channeling stories of torment and tension from Brian Azzarello, Jason Aaron, Charlie Adler, and more. Then, our cosmos hurtles toward annihilation in Cruel Universe, a cosmic maelstrom of the galaxy's strangest science fiction, packed with bizarre tales of time and space from creators including Corinna Bechko, Colin Bunn, Jonathan Case, and more. What the Comics Code Authority couldn't kill has only made it stranger. EC Comics lives again at Oni Press and Epitaphs from the Abyss and Cruel Universe, available now at comic shops everywhere. And now, back to the show. Let's talk about Batman Robin Year One. It's your upcoming 12-issue series that launches on October 16th. That is on Final Order Cutoff, FOC, on September 23rd. It's written by Mark Waid, drawn by you, with you two as co-storytellers, with Mat Lopes as the colorist and Clayton Coles as the letterer. I'll do the solicit. While Bruce Wayne adjusts to the realities of adopting orphan Dick Grayson, a mysterious new crime boss called the General has come to Gotham to claim the city by disrupting and destroying its other mobs. But what is his connection to Two-Face? Batman and his new sidekick Robin are out for answers, but will take everything they have to navigate both sides of their relationship as father and son and dynamic duo, with Dick Grayson's present and future hanging in the balance. Let's start with the basics. I kind of feel like everyone who has followed you for at least as long as you've been doing Batober have felt like this is like a destiny of yours. I don't know if like artists have destinies, but how did this project come together?
Honestly, when I finally was able to talk about it online, I was like, it's a dream come true, because it is. Like, the first comic I ever read was Batman. The first cartoon that I'd fallen in love with was Super Friends, or Superpowers, I guess, when I was working it. And I'd always just wanted to draw Batman. That was always my like number one goal. Like, it, we'd set a 5-year plan or 10-year goal or whatever, but it was always like in the hopes that at some point the end goal would be to draw Batman. And I did, a few short stories here or there, or I did the Batman Black and White, and while those felt like achievements, this is what feels like, I don't want to say I made it, but I'm high-fiving my 6-year-old self that I'm kind of doing this one now. Once I could see the end of Firepower off in the horizon, then I knew what I wanted to do next was going to be Batman. And I had pitched Batman stories previously and did not have the best luck doing it solo. I pitched stories. I had what I thought was a perfect idea. And I reached out to the editor, like a cold call, like, hey, are you guys interested in a story? I think it was Jamie Rich when he was still at DC. I said, hey, are you guys interested in me doing a Batman story? And he was like, I'm sure we are. I'll pass you off to an editor. And then I worked with an editor. He doesn't work at DC anymore, so it doesn't matter if I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But I pitched for about 6 months. I'd come up with something, they'd say yes or no, or what I could change to make it work, or what would make it so it would get approved. And we just go back and forth. It needs more of this or more of this character, or more, more, it needs to be bigger, or this part needs to be smaller. And I would try and expand the story or shrink it to make elements fit what they were looking for. And at some point, after enough back and forth, it just didn't feel like what I was pitching anymore. And it kind of fizzled out. After half a year of trying to make it, it just wasn't working. I just figured it's not meant to be right now. And, I kind of let that one go, and, I put my tail between my legs and went back and just was doing my own stuff for a while. And then that was post Captain America with Mark. So it was like somewhere when I was doing Firepower or Jana, I'd come up with what I wanted to do. And, we pitched and it didn't work out. And then Jana was done. Then I could start using my brain again, because
one at a time.
Trying to do 2 books, just my brain just kind of shuts down on just about anything else. And it's like, especially since the style of Jana is so different from Firepower, it just, trying to keep them separate was so much brain power that I couldn't think of a third thing. I don't know how writers can write 3 things or 5 or however many books. A lot of guys do like so many books in a month, and I can't keep 2 different stories straight unless they're completely opposite. But yeah, we were finishing Jana, and I was like, okay, well, this is my chance. Like, I think I still need to do Batman, before all my hair turns white, before I can't use my wrist anymore. Like, I got to do a Batman story. It has to happen. I think it was Abernathy I reached out to first, or maybe it was Mark, and said that I wanted to do Batman. And he was like, yeah, all right, let's do it. Because there was a shift change over at DC, and a lot of people were let go or moved around, or they'd moved from New York to California. And, things were so different from what they were that it was just sort of like, yeah, all right, let's do it. What do you want to do? And after having pitched for 6 months and like just trying to climb up a slippery wall, it was so weird to be like, oh, well, it wasn't meant to be, because it has to happen now. Like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And I think I texted Mark or emailed and said, hey, do you want to do a Batman book with me? And he was like, yep. And like, that was it. We just started getting on the phone and hashing out and texting and trying to figure out what our story would be. And I think this is like our 3rd version of what book we were going to do. There was a lot of focus on young Bruce, I think, originally in my first idea of what I wanted to do with the series. And they were already doing something with that hadn't been announced yet. I think, and Ben said this is a little too close to what Chip is doing with young Bruce right now. So I don't want to say no, but what else do you have? And we went back to the well and we bounced some more things around. And Mark was like, well, if this is your only time to get to draw it, what do you want to draw? And I was like, well, I love Two-Face is my favorite villain. And he's like, all right, let's do Two-Face. What else do you want to draw? And I was like, well, young Robin and a Batman that is a detective, but, not perfect, not Bat God, closer to year 1, who is still learning, and everybody makes mistakes, closer to what we did with Daredevil. He was a hero, but a hero who has flaws. And that's my favorite kind of hero, who isn't perfect and is always striving to help people, but isn't going to get it right 100% of the time. Because if they have no flaws, it's just, I don't find it very interesting. We pitched our newest version, and that went through with flying colors. And we got our editor, Andrew Marino, who is just now coming back from paternity leave. Welcome back, Andrew. And while he was gone, we had a few editors bouncing back and forth, because after Ben left, then we had to kind of start all over. We had already the series had been approved, and then he left, and we didn't really get to work on the book with him. Like he helped us get our pitch together and get the first draft of what became the first issue done and the plot of the 12 issues. But then he left, and then we had to switch to a new editor and then another new editor, and we're kind of bouncing around there at the very beginning.
I do think it's funny how you and Ben Abernathy, the previous person who ran the Batman line, he left Skybound and came over here, and then he left DC and went over to Skybound. And it was kind of like, it was like a trade that wasn't actually a trade, but it just kind of is like funny timing how it worked out.
Yeah, he emailed and was like, "You'll never believe where I'm working today." Like, what is happening?
He's like, "I'm doing this new thing called RC Coda."
I mean, it is funny how things work out. I'd been trying to work with Ben since like 2010. Jeff Parker and I pitched a Lois Lane book in San Diego, and that never got off the ground. But I'd been trying to work with him ever since. So yeah, we've almost worked together on a whole book, but there was a whole lot of phone calls, a whole lot of emails. Just never, we don't have anything really much to show for. But I love Ben. I'd work with him again in a heartbeat. But yeah, it was just supposed to be Batman and Robin, or Robin and Batman, or we just kept bouncing titles back and forth and what it could be, and Dark Knight Detective or Detective this or that, and I never knew exactly what it should be called. I just wanted to draw Batman and Robin.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark was like, "Why don't we call it Batman and Robin Year One?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, that's too much pressure. I can't." And I think it was like a week that went by, and I just kept thinking about it. And Laura was like, "Well, I mean, it's actually pretty good. I mean, like, you love Batman Year One, right?" And I said, "Yeah, it's like my favorite book," which is like why I don't want to be the not as good as Batman Year One. Like, it's so much pressure.
Yeah.
That I was worried that I wouldn't be able to live up to it. And at the end of the day, calling it Year One, while there have been a lot of other Year One books, calling it Year One makes it so people don't think it's a Black Label book that they can just write off. This is continuity. This does count. And it's almost a shorthand of saying, like, hey, this is real. This is important. This counts. It's not just the 16th Batman book that comes out in October. It's the actual history of these two characters, or 3 or 4 or 5, because I feel like Alfred is the third lead in the book. And I like that it doesn't just feel like a cast off. And there's so many people who would just be like, "Oh, another Batman book? No thanks." And I got added on Twitter with several people being like, "Oh, I've read this story," but they haven't.
Yeah.
Like, this is a new story, different things than we've seen before. We're not trying to retell stories that have already been told. We're trying to tell a story that's, that kind of weaves around some of the other stories that you may have already read. So there's Batman Year One, Robin Year One, but this is its own thing. This is Batman and Robin, their first outings as a pair. And it's, as nervous as I was to take it on at the beginning, I feel like that is the right title for what it is. And I emailed Mazzucchelli before I started work on it. I didn't say what I was doing. I just wanted to send like an email that was that was just like, "A huge fan of yours," I and just like gushed, and that it didn't, not like, it wasn't me saying, "And hey, by the way, I'm also drawing a book that takes a lot from your book," but it just felt better than just like doing it and not having said anything.
Yeah, sure. I liked a line that Mark had in the press release where he said, "This isn't a Batman and Robin story, it's a Bruce and Dick story." And
Oh, yeah.
And like that's a really good line, because I mean, obviously some would say that they're the same, and yeah, that's true, but also it like really speaks to the focus of the story, and like that's probably part of the reason why Alfred's kind of like the third lead, is like if you're gonna have it be a Bruce and Dick story, like the fulcrum that connects them is going to be Alfred in a lot of ways, and I think that distinguishes it in a lot of ways. It makes it something that's unique because it's about a relationship as much as it is about fighting crime or anything like that.
For sure. And it's, Bruce Wayne, kind of, as a person who dresses up in a costume every night, he is approaching fighting crime in the way that an 8-year-old would. Like that's what an 8-year-old would think you should do. Something in him froze when his parents died. And a lot of him is still a child. And I can definitely relate to that as a 45-year-old child. And I like the dynamic of a man who has always been an 8-year-old boy trying to raise an 8-year-old boy. Like not in the sort of Captain Marvel way of, a child in a man's body, but in the way that, he sees a lot of himself in Dick, and it kind of wants to make it right for him in the way that it never was for Bruce.
Right.
And then also having Alfred there, who has always tried his best to raise Bruce, but obviously is failing since he has, shepherded Batman into the world. Trying to have Alfred then try and raise both of them is just such a fun dynamic of, a father who isn't a father to either of them, and Bruce who has to be a father, although he's never really had one, and trying to be one for Dick, who had a pretty good family going for him. It's just it's fun to play with that.
You said the word pressure earlier, and it is interesting because this is something you've been waiting your entire life to do. It's also something that I think, I don't know if this is something that actually affects you, but Batober is, I don't mean to put too much weight on that, but that's like an event for a lot of people. October is like, oh, I can't wait to see what he comes up with when he has, for listeners that don't know, Batober has historically been like a prompt month where there'd be like a different prompt each day and Chris would draw a different piece for that. I'm not sure that this still happens for you, but was there a part of you beyond the name thing? Was there a part of you that was nervous about taking this one on because of those kind of combined expectations?
Honestly, Batober was me auditioning for a Batman book. It was my love letter to Batman once a year, and me going, hey, look, wouldn't it be cool if I did some Batman?
Look, I have these scenes in mind. Clayface does this.
Hey, at DC Comics, do you like this? And, there are editors who are always like popping up in my DMs like, hey, this is really cool. We'd love to see you do this. And the timing just never worked out. And I've been offered stuff at DC through the years, but it was always something that didn't feel important enough that it would be my first Batman job. I did a Poison Ivy story that I was pretty happy with. It was like an 8-pager with Cy Spurrier, and that was fun. That was cool. That was a step closer to drawing Batman. I did Batman Black and White with Howard Mackey, and I was like, wow, 8 pages of drawing Batman. This feels right. And that's closer to doing what I wanted to do than, 6 issues of Huntress or something.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, doing those for so long made it so there's less pressure in how I approach the characters or each panel or a scene. Because I've been doing it for so long, I feel like I already have the hang of most of these characters. Like I know after trial and error through Batober, I know my take on Harvey Dent. I know how I want to draw Alfred. And there's a lot less pressure there, like just drawing a page or how I want to interpret someone. There's a lot less pressure there. But having the name year one is really, that felt like a lot of pressure. And my first issue took me too long to draw.
How long did it take?
Since we don't do it old school, I think I spent 2 full weeks on layouts, which is a lot for me. An issue of Firepower, which came, full script, I could do 22 pages in 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And with so much being open-ended for issue 1 of year 1, I could go in so many different directions. And it kept branching off in different ways. And at one point it was like 40 pages, and it was just ballooning into something that wasn't a first issue, or it felt not like a first issue, but like, I don't know, masturbatory almost. Like I built it up for so long that it was like, why am I spending 5 panels setting up the Wayne Manor? Like, it's Wayne Manor. It's a panel. Like,
you're in your head.
Yeah, I was definitely in my head, and I had the yips for that first issue. it took like 2 weeks to draw 22 pages of layouts. My layouts are super tight, so it's like essentially pencils, but it took a while to get it all out on paper. And once I did, boy, it felt like a weight had been lifted. Having it all out and then sending it to Mark and our editor, I felt 20 pounds lighter. And having it on paper, that was, my cheat sheet for inking. And I didn't have to like stress about it anymore. Once it was all out and everybody gave it the thumbs up, then it was like, oh, now I can just get to it. And it's been easier going forward. Every issue has gone easier than the first, which, obviously it would have to, because that first one was like giving birth. I'm on issue 5 now, so we're almost halfway through, and I feel like I'm relatively comfortable. Every issue is like me hitting the reset button, like, oh, all right, am I the right guy for this book? Obviously I am, because it's like, this is our book. I'm not, a fill-in artist, so I just have to keep convincing myself, like, this is supposed to be our book. This is us telling our story. Get over yourself. Don't step on your own feet. Just sit down and get it done.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. The summer is really heating up. Zoop continues to bring the heat with campaigns launching from Simpsons legend Bill Morrison, The Art of Descender from Dustin Nguyen and Jeff Lemire, Great Pacific, the completely trashed edition from Ice Cream Man's Martin Morazzo and Joe Harris, as well as the latest from pop manga artist Camilla D'Errico. Also, there's still time to back campaigns from Sanford Green, Christian Ward, and other amazing creators. For creators looking to crowdfund your project or have your books for sale on Zoop's brand new e-commerce marketplace, click the Submit Your Project link on zoop.gg, as they are opening the doors to provide more services to even more creators. And now, back to the show. I mean, the other thing too is like with that first issue, it's not just like a first issue, it's like an important first issue for you. It's you and Mark figuring out what your process is for this. It's you and Mark figuring out what this story really is. It's you figuring out all these things and also defining what the rest of the book will be kind of like. And so that first issue isn't just a first issue. It's like a rubric for the rest of what you're going to do for the following 11 issues. So I'm not too surprised that that it happened like that. I'm also not surprised in the slightest that it was, once you figured it out, once you got through that part, it was, I'm not going to say smooth sailing, because drawing comics is not easy, but it was smoother sailing.
Yeah. Well, it's very much the same as the first issue of Black Widow, which in my head was easy. Putting it on paper was hard. It took me 8 weeks to draw that first issue from beginning to end, which is, when you're supposed to do a book every month, 8 weeks is not a month, And that happened to me again with year 1, number 1. But now that it's on the books and we're getting colors in now, and there's a script, and it's starting to become a thing, that makes issue 5 and beyond feel a little less daunting as well, because like we have all that stuff banked. It feels like it's all downhill from here, like those are already done. I don't have to worry about them anymore.
So like when you were talking with Mark and you're talking with the editors about putting this book together and what it might entail and stuff like that, it sounds like to some degree it's like, oh, I like Two-Face. I want to draw Two-Face. It was like to some degree it's like you're making requests and everything like that. Did you find that like when you were drawing Batober, I'm sure you learned a lot about which characters, you knew which characters you liked as a fan, but then there was probably the ones you realized you're like, I really like drawing this character. Did you find that there was like the two sides of your brain when you were kind of doing that request phase, where it's like the ones that I was like, I want to have them because I like this character, but I want to have these ones because I like drawing this character?
Our early version of what we were talking about doing was just sort of like, playing the hits. Why, if I want to draw everybody, why don't we try and do Hush? Why don't we try and have every issue be a villain that you want to draw? Why don't we do, Two-Face, Joker, Clayface, Catwoman? Let's just bang them out. If this is my only chance, why don't we do all of them? And at some point, things changed, and for the better. We focused in our story on what it needed to be instead of just me ticking off the boxes. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, this won't be the last time I get to draw a Batman book, because yes, that's important that I get to do it, but more important is being able to tell the story. And this is the story that felt right for Batman and Dick and Alfred and Commissioner Gordon. And it's intimate enough that it we can focus on all of them individually, but big enough that it feels important.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to shove everybody that's on my laundry list of characters that I want to draw, it didn't belong in this story.
Yeah.
But hopefully there'll be more down the road. But right now, this is, there are other villains. I don't want to say who's in there, but I figured out we've figured out what we're going to do as we move forward. And hopefully hopefully everybody's happy with what we're doing. I turned in layouts for number 5, and I think it's like the best thing that I've done in the past, I don't know, few years. I'm my own worst critic, so I have a hard time like patting myself on the back, but I'm really proud of my layouts on 5. But even when I've finished my layouts, I'm still going over it with a fine-tooth comb, trying to make sure that storytelling is working. Because as we've seen, these books stay in print now. It's not pulp anymore, where you could finish things and put it out, and if it isn't good, then you got next month. And early on in my career, that's kind of how I felt, because we weren't focused on trades and reprinting and keeping things in print. It wasn't digital. It was just like, well, you'll get them next month, champ. And there's not so much of that now. It's like, get it right, because people are going to see it.
That is the thing about something like this too, is like Batman and Robin year 1, and the fact that it's a 12-issue series, a finite series. Those are like catnip for collections, both of those things. And so no pressure.
Yeah. I just turned white.
I have an opposite of pressure question for you. In my head, you're smiling a lot while you draw this. Are you smiling while you draw this?
Yeah.
An atypical amount of smiling? Because I just feel like, I don't know, you seem very happy about it. And I'm not saying you don't normally seem happy about drawing stuff, but you seem very happy about this.
I am happy about it. This is, honestly, this is the story that I feel like I should have been trying to tell from the beginning. Like, I'm finally getting a chance to do the Batman and Robin stories I wanted to do when I was reading, Batman comics in the mid 80s. Like, I wanted to draw Batman and Dick Grayson because that's what I was reading, and now that's what I'm doing. It feels weird. For that first month, it was like, I felt really bipolar about the whole thing. Like, I was excited to be doing it, and should I be doing this? And why, like, my own worst enemy, but also like, yay, oh. I was really up and down about all of it. Like, am I making the right choice for this or that? And once I got over that first issue, a lot of it has just been, looking forward to getting to work in the morning. And it feels good to like be proud of what you're doing and know that what you're doing is right. A lot of times we can second guess ourselves out of enjoying a project. And I know that I've done that because I've second guessed myself on most things. I'm my own worst critic. So I have a hard time, not just like with RC Coda, looking back on something that's 4 months old and going, ugh, that didn't age well. But sometimes, something from yesterday doesn't age well. Like, what was I thinking? Why did I make this choice? But for whatever reason, things seem to be clicking into place with this book. And I'm happy with it. Yeah, it feels weird to be, happy with it while I'm doing it. Most of the time, it's just like, ugh, happy accidents. It's fine. Like, that panel's done. Move on to the next one. But today, I finished a page and kind of leaned back in my chair, like, yeah, that one's done. That's like, that doesn't happen very often. That's rare. At least that's rare for me. To be like, yeah, all right, looking good. Nice job, you.
It's funny. It's like you've been wanting to do this your entire life, but in some ways, it's actually kind of happening not to speak for you, but it kind of seems like it's happening at the right time for you, because you're in a position where you can do this as like the co-storyteller, and you can do this in a way where you aren't just, I think you put it this way once, maybe in this podcast, but also in our conversations, you're not just the wrist, you're telling it together with Mark. And like, that seems like that's a meaningful difference for you.
For sure. I mean, I love telling a story, but Mark is such an amazing writer, and he's become such a good friend over the years that when I was figuring out what I wanted to do next, I knew that it had to be with Mark. Like, who else am I going to do this book with? It just didn't feel right to not have Mark with me. Like, it just felt right to get the band back together,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so proud of all the stuff that we've done together that I knew that we could do something really good. I don't want to say great. I don't want to be presumptuous.
TBD, TBD. Yeah. I did want to ask, there's one other partner in this that, I mean, obviously Clayton Coles is working on it, so I don't want to discount what he's doing, but you're working with a Matt, who's your colorist. It's just not the normal Matt. It's not Mat Wilson, it's Mat Lopes. I mean, you've worked with Mat Wilson for so long. Has that been an interesting process, working with a new colorist, figuring something else out? Because, I mean, we've seen some of the work that he's colored you on. Like I think you posted a Superman number 20 cover you did where it's like Superman, there's like, it's over a field of, I believe, wheat or something, and it has an S in it, and it's beautiful. So you guys are jiving well, but what was that process like?
Well, Matt was part of the pitch.
Okay.
So he colored something, he colored a Batman of mine in like, I don't know, 2012 or something. It was like an old commission or just like a fun drawing that I did of Batman. And I'd logged that away. It was a beautiful piece. It was before he really blown up at DC and Image. And I knew that I had to work with him someday. And Mat Wilson, when he is, the last I heard was Marvel exclusive.
Right. That's what I figured.
For like creator owned stuff, there's a cutout for exclusive. So, you know, we work together on Firepower because that's a creator owned book. It's not, they're not in competition. It's not Marvel and DC. It's
sure.
You know, Image Skybound is not the same sort of, you know, they're not on the same, I don't know, for whatever reason, they're not in competition with one another. And I'd been wanting to work with Matt for forever. And when we were talking about the team for the book, I just knew that it had to be Mat Lopes because I was already so happy with that one piece. And then we'd done a couple of covers together and I was like, oh yeah, that's it. He gets it. Like he gets me. You know, we already worked well together when we haven't done anything. And then every subsequent cover that I did at DC, I did knowing that it was us trying to figure out the look of Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you know it or not from looking at it on the shelf, every time we do a cover, it's like, let's try this. Let's try a texture. Let's dial that in, dial this out. What is going to work for Batman when we finally get there? And I did a bunch of different covers that have Batman on them or that are in the Batman universe. Even my Titans covers felt like the Batman universe because Nightwing is in there and just in my head, tangentially, it's all connected. So doing those Titans covers, I was like, yeah, they're just the next town over. You know, it's this is Nightwing and Bloodhaven and, you know, they're pals. So let's figure out what that looks like and that'll inform what Batman and Robin looks like. And having done, you know, I don't know, 20 something covers now with Matt, I think we've kind of figured out what this book is going to look like. And he sent in another version of, I think, 7 pages today. And it's blowing my socks off.
Yeah.
It looks so good. I'm really picky with my own stuff and I'm really picky with colors. So I've given tons of notes and I'm a total pain in the butt, but he has been such a delight to work with, not just on those covers, but on this book so far. We're all focused on making the best book possible. So it's not like, I'm not like a foreman trying to tell people what has to get done, but we're all trying to work together to make it the best that we can. And he's so good that, I mean, my pages only can go so far, but he is pushing everything to the next level and so good. I'm so happy with it. We've only been able to share the black and white pages. So, and you know, a few covers. So I can't wait for when people see the colored interiors. He's really good. He's really, really good.
It's funny because I'm not going to say him and Mat Wilson are the same or even really similar, but I will say that they share one strength that I think is not unique. It's like a strength that they both really have is they're both very versatile. Like the fact that Mat Lopes, I believe, colors Matthias Bergara. The work he does on there, I'm sure, will be much different than the work he does on you. And, you know, like on Step by Bloody Step versus like Batman and Robin Year One. And I'm always really impressed by what he comes up with. He's just such a, I don't know, an amazing storyteller as a colorist. It's remarkable stuff.
Well, and that's what I was really focused on too, is being able to work with somebody who will help not just make a pretty picture, but help make those pictures tell a story. And the pages that I was getting today, it's 2 different scenes. And he's helping with just the mood of the colors, separating scenes and locations. It feels like a movie. Whereas it was just like a whole bunch of black and white art. He's making it feel like parts of a whole. instead of just like, here's a panel, here's a picture, here's a page. He's like making it feel in a way that I can't get across in black and white. And that's the real strength of a great colorist, is helping sell that, either the mood or emotion, or help make a setting feel like a real place. And Matt Wilson and Mat Lopes both excel at that.
So just a couple more questions. I did want to mention this before. It's a long ways out, but you're stepping in for Tim Sale for an issue in Batman: The Long Halloween, The Last Halloween with Jeff Loeb. And you're also seeing a different colorist on this one with Dave Stewart. You're not going to see that for a while, so I'm sure that will be a very unique experience. It's issue number 9 in specific. That is, I mean, it's such an interesting project because it is like an ode. It's a final story, but it's also an ode to a legendary artist. And it's finishing off a story that was built by another artist. That, I imagine, could come with its own pressure. But why was that something you really wanted to do once it was pitched your way?
I mean, Jeff kind of cold called me and said, "Hey, do you want to do an issue of last Halloween?" At first, I was sort of in shock. Like, why me? Like, imposter syndrome to the max. Like, how do I fit? And why would I do an issue of that? And then he told me, like, the murderer's row of people that are also doing it. Not everybody signed on at that point, but it was like, we have Eduardo Risto and Mark Chiarello, and we're going to have some more people. I was like, what? Like, I don't, which one of these doesn't belong. And I had always wanted to work with Jeff. Superman for All Seasons, I have on my desk literally next to me. I've always loved Tim's work, and Tim's Batman stuff is so unique and moody, and so much of the noirish mood and depth that he had in so much of his Batman stuff is what I've been striving for in mine for decades. That's what I've been, what he did was what I've been trying to do. So when Jeff asked if I wanted to do an issue that, he and Tim had come up with together, they knew what the story was going to be, but with Tim not around to do it, he said that he wanted to find artists that Tim liked to be able to carry on that story and do that story for him.
Yeah, that's awesome.
To make it something that was not just another chance to do another Batman, but also a tribute to an amazing creator, made it an easy yes.
Yeah.
Like, as much pressure as that is to try it, like, I'm not going to match up to what he does or did. Like, my Catwoman doesn't look like his, but I tried to get as close as I could. The shape of her mask, her ears, like, everything is different than what my instincts are, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just we're all trying to channel what his energy was on those characters through what we do. So it's my version of those characters as much as it's Tim's designs in my style, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally.
And I think that's what everybody's doing. Cliff's Robin is not the same Robin that you would see in a Cliff book, but it's as close as his style would match to what Tim's version of Robin is. It's a fun experiment to try and do something like this too.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fascinating project just because you have this murderer's row of artists who are all paying tribute to an artist who was so singular in a lot of ways. And like, you don't want to I think I can't speak for Tim. I didn't know Tim, and obviously I couldn't do that now. But I mean, I'm sure he would not want you to just be him. He wants you to be you doing your thing. And like, it's an interesting project in so many different ways. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how it kind of comes up. I mean, you mentioned Hush earlier. It's like the greatest possible Batman artists on one project instead of the greatest Batman villains all in one book, which will be fascinating.
It feels weird, like, to try and be shoulder to shoulder with all these folks. Becky's doing an issue, and Cliff.
Chiarello surprised me.
Yeah, he was my editor on Batman Black and White back when he had put that whole project together, and he was so great to work with. He was such a brilliant editor. I mean, so many editors, almost 99% of editors that I've worked with are story focused. I can't name another editor besides Mark that was an artist first. I mean, that's why he had so much amazing talent under him, whether it was Solo or the
Wednesday Comics.
Yeah, or Wednesday Comics or Batman Black and White. He had so many big ideas and he would get the world's best artists on some of this stuff. And he packaged that stuff so beautifully. And I got my best art notes from him. And, I'm really forgetful and I have bad memories. Or like, while working on Firepower, I'll forget to draw shoes on a character or the right shoes, or, this person's hand is supposed to be on fire, or, hey, you forgot to draw this character on this panel. And that's just sort of my regular, the normal notes that I get day to day. And, but Chiarello was like, wouldn't this flow better if this panel was flopped? Like those kind of notes where it's like, oh, this guy gets it,
Yeah.
And yeah, he's so good too. So good. I'm glad that he's like, he did a kid's book last year or 2 years ago. And he's, and his baseball watercolors are so beautiful, but having him do sequentials, I'm like pumped to see it.
I imagine those are like the notes that really kind of, the notes from like Chiarello you were getting. While all those notes are useful to varying degrees, I imagine those are the ones that kind of make you think about story in a different way to some degree and might have actually kind of guided you going forward.
Yeah, I mean, every time I think about flow of a page, I think about that one note I got from Chiarello in like 2011. Don't make it a Z, make it a smooth backwards S. Every decision on the flow of a page is a choice, and you are guiding the viewer through a page, and you're in control, whether they notice or not, of where they go and how fast something goes. And yeah, a lot of storytelling choices go all the way back to working with him, and yeah, that he made a big impact on how I approach a page.
Well, last question for you. I know we talked when at the beginning we were talking about all the different roles. You have your notes day. You have all these different things you're doing. You're doing interiors. You're doing covers. I mean, you have your doodles, the doodle sale. I have one of your doodles right. Actually, I have multiple doodles. I have a Impulse over here, and then I also have Bone and Thorn over here. And you have commissions, but you also have like managing those different lists and projects and doing everything that comes in with that. And it's interesting because I kind of feel like in some ways, I'm not saying that like people stop learning, but there's sometimes where people like, I think I've figured this out. Like this is the way that I do things, and it's just the way I'm going to do things. Do you kind of feel like you're always learning when you're on the job and you're always finding new ways that you could be doing things and new ways you want to be doing things?
For sure. I've seen a lot of folks over the years who will get good at what they do and feel comfortable and then keep doing it for 20, 30, 40, the rest of their career. And I've seen too many people plateau and not be able to work anymore. I grew up in the Bronze Age, and a lot of those guys aren't working these days. And they may be some of my favorite artists, but they're not by choice, aren't putting out books right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be one of those guys who is out of fashion, which is tough because I still get every day like, oh, your stuff's so old school. I mean, I like old school stuff, so my stuff kind of leans that way. But I don't want to end up, and I still draw everything on paper. I don't want to be a dinosaur. I do worry that if I don't change with the times that I will get left behind at some point. Even if I'm not working in Photoshop or, whatever program, and I'm not drawing on a tablet, I am still trying to get better with every issue, every project. I'm always trying to do something different, to push myself, to get better, to challenge myself, and not just be content with what I've done. Because looking back on my stuff, I know that what I'm doing now is better than then. And hopefully what I do next is better than what I'm doing now. I'm always trying to get better, because otherwise, what's the point? I love telling stories, but that's not enough. I'm also trying to get better at it so that I can make it easier for the reader, or be able to tell more impactful stories, or make you feel something more than if it was just a picture. And so, yeah, I'm always trying to push and learn and grow, and hopefully the next one will be better.
The funny thing is there's one commonality amongst like some of the best artists I talk to, and best is a relative term. I guess I should say favorite artists. Like when I talk to like you, and I talk to like Daniel Warren Johnson, and I think like, I want to say Cliff Chang said this too, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. I know Daniel said this. But you also said it. It's like one of the things you're thinking about is like, how do I do the same thing with fewer lines? And like, that's something that I think about a whole lot. And the funny thing is like, I think if somebody looked at your art and looked at Daniel's art, you probably wouldn't see the similarity, but the thought process is the same. And I find that to be fascinating because it's like, that's the type of thinking that I think is important. How can I do the same thing and have the same impact, but also have it not, I don't want to say the work minimized, but also like the amount of mark making like minimized and stuff like that. I think that's like kind of shows like the thinking and the learning that you all and like some of the great artists are trying to do is like thinking about it on like a micro scale and thinking about how that affects the macro in some ways.
Well, I mean, Toth used to say, think more, draw less. And I don't think that meant like draw less drawings. I meant like think about what you're doing and you can make less marks on the page to get across what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Think about what it is before you start just sticking down a bunch of lines it's really easy to put down 100 lines to draw an arm. It's really hard to use 2.
Right.
But 2 gets the idea across a whole lot faster. And there's something about the viewer filling in the blanks for themselves that makes it feel more, I don't know, not more real, but you can connect to it easier in the same way that you can connect to a Disney movie or Pixar. There's not a whole lot of lines there. The simplified, faces or bodies, the simplification makes it so it funnels its way into your brain at a faster rate. I don't know what it is, but
it's pure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am excited to see what you cook up as you keep learning. But Chris, that is all I have for you. Thanks for coming on to talk about learning on the job, collaboration, Batman and Robin Year One, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure. Thanks for letting me ramble so much.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Chris Samnee. You can find his work in the upcoming Batman and Robin Year One at DC Comics. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my Eisner Award-nominated subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story webcomic, David Byrne, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Holt, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Steiner IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon Tapillis, Patrick Bauer, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kingus, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Holt, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Yala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks from Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.